I never thought a quiet suburban neighborhood with manicured lawns and neat little mailboxes would turn into the stage for one of the most terrifying yet oddly satisfying chapters of my life. I moved into this community because it looked safe, orderly, and family-friendly, the kind of place where my son could ride his bike without me worrying about reckless drivers or strangers lurking around. But what I didn't anticipate was how much trouble one self-entitled, power-hungry HOA Karen could bring into our lives, especially when she decided her need for control mattered more than my diabetic son's access to his insulin. What she didn't count on, though, was that her cruelty would be her downfall, and that the very cameras she insisted the neighborhood install would be the evidence that destroyed her little reign of terror. Our neighborhood HOA wasn't something I initially worried about. I'd heard stories, sure, about overbearing board members who nitpicked about mailbox colors or fined people for leaving trash cans out too long, but I figured those were exaggerations. At first, it seemed harmless enough: a quarterly newsletter, reminders about mowing your lawn, and the occasional neighborhood barbecue. But when Karen was elected president of the HOA, everything changed. Karen wasn't just strict, she was obsessive. She thrived on making people feel small. Her lips were always pursed as if she was perpetually tasting something sour, and she walked with this air of authority that made you feel like you were living under a hall monitor rather than in your own home. Karen had a way of inserting herself into every aspect of neighborhood life. If someone planted flowers that weren't on the approved list, she would march over with her clipboard. If a car was parked an inch too close to the curb, she would snap a picture and tape a violation notice to the windshield. Most neighbors tried to avoid conflict with her by quietly complying, but I had bigger things to worry about than whether my hedges were trimmed at a perfect right angle. My son, Ethan, had type 1 diabetes, and my life revolved around making sure he stayed healthy, had access to his insulin, and could feel as normal as any other kid his age. Ethan was 12, a bright, resilient kid with a quick sense of humor that could disarm even the grumpiest of adults. He carried his insulin pump everywhere, and I carried the quiet anxiety of a parent who knew how quickly things could go wrong if his blood sugar dropped. Every decision I made, from the snacks in the pantry to how long he played outside, was colored by that awareness. Most of the neighbors knew about his condition and were kind, often asking how he was doing or keeping an eye out when he was playing with their kids. Karen, however, wasn't one of those neighbors. She saw Ethan's medical needs not as a matter of compassion, but as an inconvenience to her precious HOA rules. The first real clash happened one hot summer afternoon. Ethan was playing basketball in our driveway, and I had left a small cooler with his insulin pen and juice boxes on the porch in case he needed it. Karen marched up, arms crossed, and told me that leaving unsightly items in public view was against HOA guidelines. I tried to explain calmly that it wasn't just some random clutter, it was life-saving medical equipment. But she didn't care. "Rules are rules," she said with a smirk. "And if we let you break them, everyone will think they're above the bylaws." I remember clenching my fists, trying to keep my composure. This wasn't about a garden gnome or a trash can. This was about my son's health. I moved the cooler just inside the garage door, but I made it clear to Karen that Ethan's needs would always come before her obsession with appearances. She scoffed and walked away, but I could see the gears turning in her head. From that day forward, it felt like she had a target on our backs. The harassment escalated. She sent violation letters about Ethan's bike being left on the lawn for extended periods of time, even though it was never more than an hour. She complained that the small medical alert sign I had on my mailbox, the one that let emergency responders know a diabetic child lived in the house, was tacky and unapproved signage. She even tried to fine us for what she called excessive noise when Ethan had friends over for his birthday. Every little thing became an excuse for her to flex her authority. But nothing compared to the day that nearly broke me. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Ethan had been outside playing tag with a group of kids from the block. I was in the kitchen when I heard the door slam open. Ethan stumbled in, pale and sweating, his words slurred. My heart dropped. I knew immediately his blood sugar was crashing. I ran to grab his insulin from the cooler we kept by the door, only to realize the cooler wasn't there. Panicked, I looked outside, and that's when I saw Karen standing at the edge of the driveway, holding the cooler in one hand and wagging her finger at a group of kids. I sprinted out, screaming for her to give it back. She had the audacity to tell me that leaving it outside was a blatant violation, and that she had confiscated it until the HOA board could review the matter. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My son was literally collapsing inside, and she thought this was some kind of power move. I didn't think. I just ripped the cooler out of her hands and bolted back inside to get Ethan his insulin. Those few seconds felt like hours, but thankfully, I got to him in time. His color returned, his breathing steadied, and the crisis passed. But something inside me shifted in that moment. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was done being pushed around. Karen hadn't just crossed a line, she had endangered my child's life. And I knew I couldn't let it go. That night, after Ethan was safely asleep, I sat at the kitchen table replaying the moment in my head. My hands still trembled from the adrenaline, and my stomach churned with rage. But mixed in with the fury was a cold, clear determination. Karen thought she was untouchable because she had a title and a clipboard, but what she didn't realize was that her own arrogance had set the stage for her downfall. You see, Karen had recently pushed the HOA to install a series of security cameras around the neighborhood, claiming they were for safety and accountability. Most people grumbled, but went along with it. Little did she know, those very cameras had captured her snatching the cooler and preventing me from reaching my son. I knew then exactly what I had to do. The next morning, I contacted the HOA's property management company and requested access to the camera footage, citing a medical emergency. They were hesitant at first, but when I mentioned that police might need to get involved, they quickly complied. Watching that footage made my blood boil all over again. Karen, smug and self-satisfied, yanking the cooler away as my son staggered toward the house. But it also gave me the leverage I needed. I took the footage straight to the police. The officer I met with didn't just see it as a petty neighborhood dispute. He saw it for what it was: endangerment of a minor. They opened an investigation, and when Karen was confronted, her confident facade started to crack. She tried to argue that she was just enforcing the rules, but the officers weren't buying it. The footage didn't lie, and neither did Ethan's medical records. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People who had once kept their heads down to avoid Karen East's wrath suddenly had the courage to speak up. Stories poured out about her harassment, her intimidation tactics, and her abuse of power. The HOA board held an emergency meeting, and for the first time, the community was united against her. She was voted out as president, stripped of her authority, and slapped with fines and legal consequences that she couldn't weasel her way out of. The look on her face when the police showed her the footage will forever be etched in my memory. That smug superiority melted into shock, then fear, as she realized she wasn't in control anymore. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in months: relief. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, about knowing that my son could finally play outside without being treated like a criminal for needing medical care. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood felt lighter. People smiled more, kids played without fear of being scolded, and even the lawns seemed greener without Karen's shadow looming over us. As for me, I learned a powerful lesson. Never underestimate the power of standing up, not just for yourself, but for the people you love. Because when someone crosses the line from being an annoyance to being a danger, staying silent only gives them more power. So to anyone listening to this story who has ever dealt with a Karen in their own life, especially the HOA kind, know this: sometimes the best revenge isn't just sweet. It is the kind that comes with undeniable proof, a police report, and the collective satisfaction of watching a bully finally get exactly what they deserve.